Well, hello there. This is Jaenisch Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Today, I've got a game that demonstrates a really nice opening. So I played the Jaenisch Gambit, exchange variation, but where white plays Queen H5 check. This is a really cool line. There are some tricks. I won very quickly. Let's go take a look. So the Ruy López opening is one of the oldest openings in chess, and that's e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then the Ruy López bishop, bishop b5, as mentioned, one of the oldest openings in chess. Now, in this game, I had a look at my opponent's games afterwards during analysis, had a look at opening tree, and they were quite a Ruy López player. They played about 1,800 games, 1,800 games of the Ruy López opening. And the thing is, most people who play the Ruy López will rarely see the Jaenisch Gambit, the immediate f5. In fact, for my opponent, out of the 1,800 Ruy López games they played, they'd only seen f5, Jaenisch Gambit, 14 times. And in fact, they lost the majority of those games. While obviously as a regular Ruy López player, they won more than half, about 55%, 54% of the Ruy López games. So I think that f5 is one of the best responses with black that you could play against the Ruy López. Here, they play the exchange variation, which is very, very common. So captures, captures, and part of the power of the Jaenisch Gambit is that here white almost always captures like this, and it's already a slight inaccuracy. That pawn looks like it's hanging. However, their best move is actually just to develop the other knight, not to capture. Now, the Jaenisch Gambit is named after Carl Jaenisch, who is probably best known for his analyses of the Petrov defense, actually. So he was a Finnish Russian player, and with Petrov, another Russian player, they really developed and analyzed what is now known as the Petrov defense. But Jaenisch also analyzed this variation, this response against the Ruy López, and he published his works, his analysis on this in the early 1840s. Here, black has a single critical move, which is queen to d4, with a fork of the knight and pawn, but notice also that the queen is on that long dark square diagonal. The very first game of this particular line, so even though it's been analyzed by Jaenisch, was once again in the series of games in the 1850s between John Cochrane and Banerjee in India, so in Calcutta. So I've talked about Banerjee before, the Indian defense, the Indian attacks, as well as some of the attacks which became popular in the hypermodern era, were actually played very routinely in the Indian tradition of chess. And that was first really identified in those series of games in 1850 between Cochrane and Banerjee. Have a look at my blog. Link is in the description for a little bit more information. Now, in this game, John Cochrane played the Jaenisch Gambit. So he played this game against Banerjee in 1850. Quite possibly, Cochrane would have read the analyses from Jaenisch, which was published, I think, in 1842. This opening was, however, foreign to Banerjee, who played the Ruy López. And here, the best move for white is actually not very obvious, knight back to f3. Losing that pawn with check looks terrible, but that's actually the most accurate move. Here, Banerjee found the move which we still see to be the most common response in this position by white, which is queen h5 check. And this is a mistake. You can see Stockfish immediately says black now gains the advantage. In fact, at higher depth, it's quite a bit worse than minus 1.3. I think it's, minus 2.3, worse than minus 2. Here, it kind of almost makes sense for white because with check, white will have probably calculated, well, black and block, but now in this usual pattern, it's good for white to capture with that knight. Knight captures because if knight moves again, there's a discovered check, and it looks like that pawn is pinned because it looks like it's defending, but it's pinned to the rook. And here, basically, white would normally do really well, except that the black queen on d4 on that dark square diagonal defends the rook. So it's not hanging. And in fact, after pawn captures knight, the other option is to play knight to attack the queen. No, it's about the same, but at high depth, this is a little bit better, and it's also just a lot more straightforward. I certainly play games here where white, not recognizing that the rook will, that the pawn was not pinned, will immediately take the rook and lose their queen. Now in this game, my opponent did see that, saw, look, can't take the rook, but here capture with check, that is their best move, capture with check, and here in this position, black has a second important critical move, which is king to d8, giving up the right to castle. This is the best move. Black is still ahead. It's still around minus 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. And suddenly, white is in a bit of trouble. So the queen is kind of not in the right place. There's no immediate place where they can give check. In this position, white finds the best move, which is d3, opening up that dark square diagonal. And in this position, there are a number of moves. The best move is, in fact, knight, quite obvious, to e7 and start to chase the queen with development. But here, and that is in fact the move in the Cochrane-Banerjee game, the Banerjee-Cochrane game, that is the move that Cochrane played. And Cochrane actually won this game quite quickly. Have a look at my blog. There's a link to the actual game. In this position, there's a really tricky move which I didn't play in this game, which is bishop to d6. A super tricky line. It does equalize back to 0, 0, 0. But in this position, notice that the H pawn, so the H file, is semi-open. White has no development of their queenside pieces. So they're going to feel like they want to castle kingside, especially once the attack starts going in the center. King feels a bit exposed in the middle. Now, in this position, if white castles short, which is what you're potentially aiming for, you can see a mate in 6. Absolutely wonderful line, beautiful line, and it goes like this. The bishop captures the pawn at h2 with check, king forced to move to h1, and now we bring the bishop back to f4, blocking their dark square bishop, discovered check with our rook, king back to g1, and now we sacrifice our rook, or rook h1 check, again, only a single force move, king must capture the rook, and now we've got queen to h8 with check, and basically queen to h2 will be mate. So they can delay mate by blocking check with the queen, captures, check, king back to g1, mate. Beautiful 6-move checkmate, so mate in 6. Very, very lovely. However, in this position, you are relying on white to castle short. And if they don't, you're back to 0, 0, 0. It's okay. You're not losing, but you lose your advantage. So knight here is best. In this position, I actually couldn't quite remember what was the right move, so I decided not to play that. I thought this was probably less accurate, but I played it anyway. Knight to f6, just to see what would happen. Here, black slightly ahead, maybe 0, 0, 0 at higher depth. But my idea here is potentially adding another, more pressure onto the e4 pawn. Potentially the knight will jump forward to g4 as well. Double attack, or 2 attackers on the f2 pawn, white's weak f pawn. I thought that potentially looked quite good. It's not very accurate, but it does require white to find a single good response, which isn't necessarily that easy to find. They must find bishop to G5, ostensibly pinning, but then you can block here and then you can trade it all down. And actually, after you trade all down, white is potentially okay. So that's why white is okay here. But here they didn't find that. It's not a very intuitive move because queen is otherwise looking at the b2 pawn as well. They played this to try to quick my queen and I regained some advantage. Here, I was thinking either queen to here or queen to here, and queen to d6 is the more accurate move. I thought that could have been the case in the game, and it actually is on analysis, but I decided to play queen to e5 in this position. Tricky move. And I'm thinking, because white's thinking of the moves, it's easy to lose sight of continuity. The fact that the H file is actually semi-open because my pawn captured this way can be easy to forget. With the queen here, king looking very tender, they're gonna feel forced, feel like they must, castle short to get the king out of danger. However, that would be a mistake. Here, they lost sight of continuity. They short castled, and now queen to h2 mate. And part of the logic with the this particular line, this particular variant of the Jaenisch Gambit is that once the king has moved with these semi-opened H and G files, we try to launch a massive attack on white's king side, especially if they castle short. Often they will castle short because of imminent threat and the difficulty with castling with those pieces undeveloped. Anyway, I hope you learnt something about the Jaenisch Gambit, exchange variation, queen h5 check line. Give it a go. I think it's a pretty good. line. I think it's really fun. And even if it doesn't work out so well, you don't get a Ruy López game. You get a really, really aggressive tactical game. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.